I recently had the chance to chat with Matt Whitbeck from Whitbeck Construction about the right way to waterproof and weatherproof the outside of your home before you put up that window or siding.
Now it's time for Open House, sponsored by Pyramid Heating and Cooling.
You know, when it comes to building science, there's a handful of people that I call friends that I lean on across the industry. My buddy Matt Whitbeck, who I've shared the stage with across the country teaching contractors and everything else, is one of those guys from Whitbeck Construction. Matt, welcome to Around the House Northwest.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. This is it's great to be on again.
Thanks, brother. Well, man, you hit it out of the park here a few seasons ago. It was nice watching you on This Old House as a contractor. And, you know, you've been educating contractors for a long time. And I wanted to talk a little bit about building science. And of course, you and I could sit here for 4 hours and just scuff the surface of that, which isn't what we're doing today. But I wanted to talk about some of the mistakes that happen that are common when people are like getting ready to tackle maybe that window project or that siding project. What are you seeing out there as some of the common mistakes that people are making?
I'd say number one is just people. I don't know if it's just not being trained well enough, but not reading the directions, man. You know what I mean? It's always a good time to refresh yourself. And I can't tell you, even though I've been factory trained with so many brands at this point, I'm always popping the instructions open because sometimes something changes. Sometimes they find that, you know, what used to be a 1/4-inch gap is now an 1/8-inch gap. You got to keep up with the stuff, and it's really important. And just, you know, the resourcefulness. But I think that, you know, beyond reading the instructions and making yourself familiar, which should be the normal practice, right? Like the order of operations is always to get all of your items prepared before you start a job. So you kind of need to read the instructions to make sure everything's there, because that's one of the worst things that can happen is you make it part way through an install and you have, you know, tape that's setting up or mastic that's setting up, sealant that's setting up, and you don't have, you know, that one piece that you need to really see it all the way through. So
yeah, that is great advice. That is great advice because, yeah, and there's so many systems out there, right? So everybody has their own system when it comes to maybe a weather-resistant barrier or a flashing system or things like that. And you're right, those things change so often because they're all trying to get better and better every year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important thing, you know, really beyond read the instructions. The instructions will lead you through the branding of what you're working with. So there will be reference typically as to what applies with the other thing. And when we deal with some of the brand specific items, you know, cohesion is pretty important, right? We want things to be cohesive. We want them to be able to be cooperative with each other. So, you know, if you have a line of a product, obviously that line has been tested together, right? Yeah. The mixing and matching of different products, that can get kind of dicey, right? It puts a lot of liability on your head as a contractor because you had a little bit left over from the last job and a little bit on this job, and you're mixing and matching silicone with elastomeric or, you know, an acrylic tape with a butyl tape. Like this, it's not a great idea to be using your client's house as a you know, a test lab and see what happens.
Especially when stuff we're putting up, you know, with sidings and stuff these days or windows, you know, they're designed to last decades, and you're putting something underneath it that you're never going to see again, but you've got your fingers crossed that it's going to hold up.
Yeah, that's important. I would say technologically, if we're doing things by the book, we should be building the best houses in the history of mankind. So we have the best tools. We have the best technology. The resources of materials we can get is just limitless. And really what's lacking is just discipline and dedication often from people to really see it all the way through. And, you know, that gets tricky. The exteriors, it doesn't matter how nice of an interior of a home you put together. If you don't put a nice shell up there, everything's going to be ruined. So that's really, you know, your 101. That's back to caveman era, right? Get a shelter around you. So, you know, what's the shelter want to be? It wants to be waterproof, right? We want to make sure we're keeping rain off our head. So being able to counter flash, keep wind off us, you know, making sure that the house is sealed up properly. It's hard. You know, I've heard several industry specialists kind of talk about, you know, that's the new craftsmanship, really, that everybody's always looked at the craftsmanship in a home build as, the guys doing those fine moldings and the crowns and all of these artisanal pieces, maybe, the stairs, everything that's really tying it together. And then, it's not necessarily anymore. There's a lot of craft that goes into weatherization and getting a house tight and making sure it's waterproof.
Yeah, and that can be the difference of a siding job or a window job lasting 3 years or 30 years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's windows on the market that are rated for 50 years. So, I mean, why not get every ounce out of them? And I've seen good installations of products far surpass what the warranty specification is on an item. So I've seen really good installs of cheaper windows that probably should only lasted 18 to 22 years, that 30 years later they're doing fine. But they were shimmed correctly, they were sealed correctly, they were used correctly, and that's one of the things we can't control as craftsmen is necessarily how somebody's going to use the item after you leave it. But the hope is, right, you do it correctly, somebody uses it correctly, and they get a great life out of it.
Exactly, brother. Exactly. Well, Matt Whitbeck, thanks for taking the time. I know you're in the middle of getting this show home set up right now for your big tour, so I better let you get back at it.
All right, man. Talk to you later.
Appreciate you, brother. Thanks for coming on Around the House.